of the intimacy that we have with God, something is birthed into us. Something is birthed. Out of your intimacy with God, something is birthed into you. My question to you is, when was the last time that you were intimate with God and conceived something as a result of that intimacy? When? When was the last time that you were intimate with God and you conceived something as a result of that intimacy? To know God, those that know their God shall be strong and do exploits. But see, Moses didn't know God well enough to describe him to the people. And he lacked the conviction concerning his own relationship with God because he had not grown up with God. So how much intimacy can you honestly have with somebody and you don't even know their name? He's having to ask God, what's your name? God has given him an assignment. He's like, who are you? Who are you? Listen, before you get a great vision for ministry or for business, get a great vision of God. Before you get a great vision for God, get a great vision of God. A great vision of who God is. Because until you know who God is, you don't understand what he is capable of doing through you. Until you know who God is, you don't know what God is capable of doing through you. Those who know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So until you know God, you will never understand your true potential. You'll never understand your true potential. Here's the third thing that I want you to see. He asked another question. This other question is in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 1. Then Moses answered and said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. So here's the question is, what if they don't listen? What if they don't listen? The first question was, who am I? The next question was, who are you? And here's this third question is, what if they don't listen? What if they don't listen? This is a question. The first question was a question of identity. The second one that he was dealing with, he came down, this was a question of intimacy, but this is a question of intimidation. Intimidation. What if they don't listen? What if I go there and say this, that you told me to come down here and say these things? Now he's intimidated because Moses is worried about people's reaction to him. He's worried about people's reaction. Worried about people's reaction. Remember, there are only three opinions that matter. Your opinion of God, God's opinion of you, and your opinion of yourself. Those are the main three opinions that matter. God's opinion of you, your opinion of God, and your opinion of yourself. And too many times people live their whole life trying to live up to somebody else's opinion who really does not even know your God assignment and God identity. You can grow up in the house and your mom and daddy may not even understand your God identity. They don't even know who they're raising. They're too familiar with your flesh to see the gift of God in your life. Your own brothers and sisters commit the sin of familiarity because they know you and because you all used to sleep together. They don't even recognize God's gift that's locked in the earthen vessel. They're so familiar with anybody know what I'm talking about? They're so familiar with your earthen vessel that they can't even see God's incredible gift that's in you. So he's intimidated. What if they don't listen? What if they don't listen? What if they don't listen? And sometimes we are forced to deal with somebody whose heart is hardened against the things of God. We're dealing with people with hardened hearts. Idolatry has the capacity to harden the human heart. And idols come in all kinds of shapes and forms. It could be the idolatry of lust and pornography. And another idol could be somebody's success of somebody's career, success of somebody's business, success of somebody's ministry. An idol could be a family member. It could be your spouse. It could be a child. It could be your family. But a hardened heart renders a person insensitive to God, and oftentimes insensitive even to the needs of others when the heart becomes hardened. When Pharaoh's heart was hardened, he became insensitive to God. But see, God would purposefully harden Pharaoh's heart just so he could do his wonders in the land of Egypt. God wanted to show out. And so he had to harden his heart because, had he tapped out at the first miracle that was done, we wouldn't have gotten all of those 10 plagues to see stuff that we had never heard of before. So God said, you know what, I got some tricks. I'm going to show my stuff. So God had to harden him because he was a human being, and under normal circumstances, he would have melted and changed and said, oh, okay, I surrender. He would have tapped out. So God had to harden him so he could display his works. And so by that, God was saying that my plan will work, but not right away. May I tell you that sometimes that when God has given you an assignment, God is saying, my plan will work for you, but not right away. I'm going to harden some things. He says, let patience have a perfect work. I don't know who I'm talking to. But God says, my plan will work. What I've called to you, what I've prophesied concerning you, it will work, but not right away. Please, just because it doesn't work right away, don't take that as though God has been unfaithful to you. Let patience have her perfect work. And if a person doesn't believe you, don't use your mouth to convince them. Use what's in your hand. Use what's in your hand. Use what's in your hand. You got to be able to throw down what's in your hand. You can't talk people out of stuff that you didn't talk into. So when they don't believe in you, you don't try to talk to them. You know, God is going to use me. God is going to use me. You can't talk people into the fact that God's going to use you. You just got to do the work and let them see it. Just got to do the work. You got to show your hand. I'm telling you, you just got to use what's in your hand. Throw it down. And sometimes when you throw it down, it's going to scare you. Moses turned it loose. It turned into a snake. He ran away from it. But then he had to come back and he took it up by the tail. And I believe that when God told him, I want you to take this thing by the tail, not only was God telling him that I want you to confront the fear of this thing, because how many of you know that picking up a snake by the tail is the wrong way to pick it up? Because its head is free to come and latch onto you. But I believe that when God was telling him to grab this thing by the tail, he was saying, I want you to get the end from the beginning. Because God, the Ancient of Days, is the God who he declares the end of a thing from the beginning thereof. God says, I want you to touch the finished work, that I've already finished this thing. And we always going for the head, but God says, I want you to just go for the tail of this thing, because I've already finished this thing from the beginning. And I'll back this thing up, and then I'll release my purpose in your life. Just grab it right now. You grab the end of this thing. That's God giving us a vision, showing you you've already got victory, because when you've killed this thing, you hold it up by the tail. This is the finished work of everything that God has prophetically declared is going to come to pass in your life. So when God has said this is the way that it's going to be, don't be afraid to turn it loose and then pick that thing up by the finished work of Jesus Christ. We enter into his rest. We labor to enter into his rest. That's where we turn our faith loose and say, God, do your thing. Do your thing. But until you turn it loose, except the corn of wheat fall to the ground and die, it abides alone. Turn it loose. You're trying to work things and change your husband and change your son, your daughter. Turn it loose and watch God do his thing. Watch God do his thing. Turn it loose. I dare you. Whatever has been stressing you out, whatever has been messing you up, turn it loose. Let it go. Let it out of your hand. This thing is bigger than you. And I'm just here to tell you that when you know the one that called you, the one that anointed you, the one that appointed you, and has you praying for this thing, turn it loose. Turn this thing loose. Lord, that's your child. That's your child. Look, the man that thou hast given to me, the woman that thou hast, turn it back over to him. Let it go out of your hand. And then God will tell you the right time when it's time for you to pick it up again. Hallelujah to the Lamb of God. Some things we have to turn loose. Here's the next issue that Moses dealt with, is in verse 10 of Exodus chapter 4. Then Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I'm not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I'm slow of speech and of slow tongue." He says, I've never been a good speaker. This is his reasoning against God. I've never been a good speaker. I've never been a good speaker. Since before I met you and since I met you. He said, I've never been a good speaker. This is a problem. This is a statement of inadequacy. Moses is feeling inadequate. He's gone through, he's dealt with identity issues. I mean, he's dealt with all of these things that have preceded him before. Now he's coming down, he's dealing with inadequacy. He's already dealt with intimidation, he's inadequate. But listen, God's promise to him is that God would teach him what to say. Moses had to work on how to say it. Are you listening? God will give you what to say. We have to work on how to say it. Now, my great-granddaddy, who was a preacher, said it this way, that God will give you the words, but it takes some education to spit them out. See, God gives us what to say, but it is very interesting that we develop how to say it. And you can have something that came from God that was communicated in the wrong way, and it can bring offense. And so Moses is really struggling with how to say it. His inadequacy is over how to say it, because he says, I'm not eloquent of speech. And so God was really looking for someone with availability and trustability. He wasn't looking for the ability. He said, I got the ability. I'm looking for availability and trustability. You notice 2 Timothy 2:2, and the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. God commits himself to faithfulness, not ability. You know why? Because you can take a person and make them able. You can take a faithful man, a faithful woman, and make him or her able, but you can't always take gifted people with great ability and make them faithful. So he says, what you've received from me, I want you to give it to faithful people who shall be able. God called Moses not because he was able, but because he was faithful, and God would make him able. And he only allowed him to lean on Aaron for so long. And every time that he went for the first few miracles, it was Aaron laying down the rod. And it was Aaron's rod. But after a while, it was the rod of Moses. Moses was working his own rod and speaking his own words. God only allowed Aaron to speak for him for so long, and then he faded into the background, and Moses started working his own rod. And God used him and built him, even though he started out with great inadequacy. So God brings others alongside us to compensate for our weaknesses. In other words, you have to staff your weaknesses. You have to staff your weaknesses. And then here's what he was saying in verse 13. But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send." Here's the fifth line of reasoning that Moses gives to God. He said, send someone else more suitable. Send someone else. He says, Lord, I don't care who else you use, as long as it's not me. Anybody else. Lord, I volunteer anybody but me. Send somebody else more suitable. This is a statement of inferiority. He's dealing with inferiority here. Moses felt inferior because he compared himself to others, especially his brother Aaron. He knew that he couldn't speak like Aaron. And when he compared himself to another, that's when he felt inferior. You don't ever feel inferior unless you are comparing yourself to somebody else. Oh, that's my good child. Why would you compare your children? They are unique. Each one of them has strengths. Yes, your good child might be wonderful and obedient, but this one is a risk taker. This one is adventurous. Every now and then you need somebody like a Peter who's going to cut off somebody's ear for you. You know, the same, I'm just telling you, you got somebody with a whole lot of attitude and a whole lot of mouth, and that same thing that works against you, if it ever gets on your side, it'll work for you. See, so, I mean, there's a time, that this sweet one here, she ain't gonna get anybody told, but you call Shanae name. Now there's some things, some situations that are ordained for Shanae name. Because Shanae gonna call an ace, and a spade, and she don't care who it is and how big they are, and then she just gonna say it. If she get beat up, she'll say it again. So that God has a place for everything. Don't compare, because you'll lose yourself. And you'll wind up feeling inferior because you are overestimating somebody else's gift and calling and underestimating the very gifts and calling that God may have given to you in your own life. And I want you to realize that when Moses was telling God, send someone else more suitable, what he didn't realize is that the Lord had already chosen whom he wanted. Jesus said to us in St. John chapter 15 in verse 16, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. And listen, with all of Moses' issues, why do you think God chose to send Moses anyway? With all of the issues, he was a murderer. He had dealt with different issues. With all that Moses dealt with, why do you think that God chose Moses anyway? He's trying to develop in him a faith for his next level, his next assignment. He knew how to be the prince of Egypt, but he didn't know how to be God's drum major for justice. And now it's a new experience. And while he was a bold and audacious and confident prince of Egypt, he was a very timid leader for God. But God loved him for the meekness that he had in his heart. God chose him because he was the meekest man. Meekness is not weakness, it is strength under control. And to be meek means to be teachable. And so even though Moses might have felt inadequate and inferior and intimidated and all of these issues that he was dealing with, God knew that Moses was teachable. Never lose your teachable spirit. Never lose the spirit where you can be teachable. You might wonder, after all of the stuff that Moses was suffering with, why would God choose Moses anyway? Why would he choose him anyway? The answer is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27 through 29, where the Bible says, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. So no wonder God would go to the meekest thing that he could find, and the most teachable, and the one that was filled with this sense of inadequacy, because God knew that if whatever I do through Moses, that no flesh is going to glory in his life. That God was saying that I'm going to get all of the glory, because everybody saw what a mess Moses was. And you know what we finally learn even in the New Testament about Moses? Is that the Bible later in the New Testament says that Moses was a man mighty in words and deeds. So God helped him over time to overcome his lack of ability in being able to communicate. And Moses became mighty in words and deeds. God was able to use him. But it's because God built his faith over time. And he took somebody who didn't have all of the luxuries of life, and he put his glory on him. And he says, I'm going to take somebody with a negative background who's made mistakes and who didn't even know me, who grew up not knowing me. And I'm going to do some things in their life where people, when they see what I enable them to do, what I empower them to do, they're going to know that this was not just the work of a man or a woman, but this was the grace of God. And God says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the least likely person. Not many wise, not many noble are called. God says, I'm going to take the base thing, the rejected thing, the abused thing. I'm going to take the rebellious thing, and I'm going to put my glory on it. And people are going to realize that this is nothing but the hand of God, because they couldn't do this in their own strength. And so God says, I'm going to be glorified, and I'm going to use the person that is the most least likely to be used, so that no flesh can glory in my presence. And then nobody will say that they've just done this because this is the result of the great education that they have had. No, no, no. When you're able to speak by the Spirit of God and let something come from the heart of God, and where you articulate a God thought and the deliverance power of God flows, I don't care if you went to Harvard or Oxford, England, you won't be able to be trained how to minister by the Spirit by a human being. This is the work of God. When God prophetically does something, when God graces you to be able to build something in your life, and you realize, I didn't even know what I was doing. I stumbled into this. I shouldn't have been qualified for where I am. This was the work of God. How, if they had ever asked me did I ever see or know that God would trust me with this, or that he would give that to me? And if we'd ever be honest with ourselves, the answer would be no. I never knew that I could do it. And the only reason that God would take those of us in that position is it so that no flesh would glory in his presence. I cannot tell you how shy and introverted I grew up as a child, and even when I'm around people today, when I'm not in the pulpit and not standing in the office of the bishop, I'm still that quiet, shy, introverted person. I'll sit next to a person on a plane and barely say two words unless God is just pressing me. He has to really be riding on me, because I so identify with Moses. That's not my natural nature. What I do, I'm out of my comfort zone doing what I do with people. I wanted to be a CPA so that I could just deal with numbers and not have to deal with people. And God had another plan. It's amazing that he would take somebody quiet and shy instead of this gregarious extrovert. And he uses extroverts too, but he uses introverts as well. And he uses highly skilled people, and he uses people with no skill at all. And he uses rich people, and he uses poor people, and he uses educated people, and he uses the unlearned. He's God. And why would God use somebody that doesn't have all of the credentials, and somebody whose credit score is jacked up, and somebody who might have a rap sheet because you've spent a few nights in jail? Why would God do that? So that no flesh would glory in his presence. I sat at dinner last night in Dallas. The man that was a professional football player. And he was so mean in his younger years. His dad was in prison, and he never met his dad until he was 10 years old, and his dad came home from prison. And the little 10-year-old boy ran out to meet his dad. And his dad walked up to him on the porch and punched him in the face and said, I dare you to cry. He says, because men don't cry. And he began to form the seeds of a hardened man. And that same man that I had dinner with last night murdered 5 people. And God brought his glory on him, got him out, and he's now reaching men for Jesus Christ all over the world. He's still a big tough guy, somebody hollered at his wife and came on to her. She came in the house and told her husband. He went out to settle the issue. 3 guys. And he said, did one of you all say something to my wife? And these were grown men. These were not teenagers. These were 3 grown men. And he said, yeah, I said something. He pulled a pipe out and hit the guy that I had dinner with. It's probably the last time he'll hit anybody else. Because he hit one of the guys so hard that he knocked that guy out, and his body hit the other guy and knocked him out. And when the guy who had the pipe saw all of that, he took off running. He sent 2 of them to the hospital. And God put his transcendent glory on him. Put his glory on him. And he's going in prisons now, sharing his story about the grace of God and what God did in his own life. I'm just telling you, you can't get so low and do things so awful that you're out of the reach of God for his glory to be able to give you a testimony for the glory of God. It's amazing. I spoke out in Phoenix, Arizona earlier this year. Here was a lady, beautiful woman, her husband. She went out and committed adultery on him. Got pregnant with another man's child of another race. And God told her husband, I want you to stay with your wife and raise the child. The child is about 10 or 11 years old now. He's doing it. You don't do that in your flesh. That's a testimony of the love of Jesus Christ, the forgiveness that comes, that washes us. I'm just telling us, there's a story that God has in your life that has his glory written all over it. And you got to tell that story. In this next dimension, you may not feel qualified. You might feel inadequate in so many areas. You might feel intimidated. And if it doesn't intimidate you, it's not God. It ought to intimidate you. Because if it doesn't intimidate you, you won't feel the need for faith. And you're going to need faith for where God is taking you. Get ready for the journey of a lifetime. It's going to be good.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for